Welcome to our series on how to play Warhammer 40,000 2nd Edition. If you yearn to replay exciting battles like this, then you are in for a treat, as we will be teaching you how to navigate the minefield of rules this edition uses. Using the Battle Report-O-Matic, I've set up our game board to demonstrate some basics of movement. So, the first question. How do you move this squad forward? If you answered that each model may move up to its movement characteristic in inches, then you are wrong. You have fallen into one of the many traps of this edition. We think it's best to set some expectations for learning Warhammer 40,000's 2nd edition rule set. What you see and hear during these videos will confuse, frighten and upset you, but if the future we have foreseen comes to pass, learning 2nd edition will become mandatory education for all school children between the ages of 10 and 23, and as such, you are going to need these skills just to interact with supermarket checkouts, your feeding station, and the euthanasia machines. Now back to the subject of moving models. There were several mandatory subphases of the turn that need to be respected first, plus an optional but highly recommended step where you negotiate with your opponent at the very start of the game over the effects of the individual terrain pieces. By the definitions in the rules, some of the terrain will not affect movement at all, some will half movement, some will quarter it, and some will mean the terrain is impassable. But what about the picture we looked at the beginning? How do we charge the Guardian on the burnt out building, or the orcs on the roof? What about the classic looking rolling hills here on the back page of the War Gear book? Now imagine trying to negotiate this in turn 3 or 4 of a 3-hour game. These days, if such a situation were to occur, the standard advice from most wargamers would be to try and flip the table and call it a draw. However, you'll find this advice impractical, as 2nd edition armies are comprised mainly of lead. Therefore, this channel recommends that if you make this faux pas in real life, start a fire, and in the confusion, call it a draw. With that discussion out of the way, we can reset the table and start again. Uh-oh, what's this? On a separate area of the battlefield, your Space Marine captain needs to declare a charge against some orcs who are surrounding a rhino that had its track blown off last turn. Now we can finally begin the first part of the movement phase, which is to declare charges. Simply state which models will be making charges. Beware that in 2nd edition you never pre-measured distances and had to eyeball it. After declaring charges, your opponent could then fire Overwatch at the unit or character that was moving. Overwatch is pretty long-winded and deserves its own video, so we will skip this for now. Next up is mandatory movement. The two major types of this are either out-of-control vehicles or clouds of gas, insects or floating mines. In our example, we are looking at a vehicle that is out of control. To resolve this particular situation, you'll need to roll 3d6 and randomise the direction as either 45 degrees left, straight forward, or 45 degrees to the right. And with the smoothness of an emergency stop on a highway, we run into one of the many rules problems with 2nd edition. In this case, collisions. Despite having an entire page to deal with them, they remain highly contested. If a vehicle moves into a unit on foot, they will dive out of the way. If the vehicle is travelling over 10 inches or it hits another vehicle or terrain piece, it will collide with whatever it comes into contact with. If it collides with infantry, the first model has a chance to jump out of the way by rolling under their initiative characteristic. The next model to take this test gets a +1 modifier for each other model that has already previously taken the test in that move. If they don't manage to dive out of the way, both they and the vehicle take a hit. There are many points of contention that will occur here. Number 1, where do the models that get run over and survive get placed? Do they stay in the same place, get pushed forward, or get placed at the side? Number 2, if the vehicle hits a terrain piece, the players have to decide amongst themselves whether it gets removed from play or not. No, really, it literally says this in the rules. Number 3, finally, where exactly do models get placed when they dive out of the way? In the example shown, it could involve a model either moving into or out of charge range of our Space Marine captain. Once you have resolved this, if you ever resolve this, and assuming you are still on speaking terms with your opponent, you can finally carry out the third step, which is to move the charging models. You better hope that these models are in range of whoever they are charging, as if you can't reach your target during a charge, your model doesn't move. The charge fails, and the model does nothing that turn. This is a pretty brutal penalty for being out of range by 1/4 of an inch, especially if the model making the charge was a psyker. No psychic powers for you that phase. Finally, in the 4th phase, you can move your original squad into the cover in the middle of the board. You can either move your movement characteristic and still shoot all weapons, or you can double this distance by running, but then you won't be able to shoot at all that turn. Heavy weapons like missile launchers state that they can either move or fire. In this case, you can move the members of the squad who don't have these weapons without penalty and leave them stationary. Models can turn to face the direction they want without a penalty, because 2nd edition was the edition where nearly everything had a 90-degree fire arc in the direction they were facing. Now you can have a nice sit down on your acclaimed antique chair and pour yourself a stiff drink. You've had a tough first day. Except, hold the orange rind on that old fashioned, we need to discuss a tiny little sentence that breaks the entire game. In the rulebook, it states that troops may not run if there are enemy troops within 8 inches of them. If running troops move to within 8 inches of enemy troops, they immediately stop and ready their weapons. While some of the rules in 2nd edition just add complexity to the game, this outright breaks it. If a unit of orcs or other infantry with an 8-inch run move was moving up the board and trying to engage the enemy in close combat, they would have to stop once they were 8 inches from an enemy model. The opponent could then move their models back 1 inches so the orcs couldn't charge in their next turn. This rule also appears to allow both sides to do some stealth measuring. If either party thinks they are within 8 inches of the opponent's forces, they would have to break out the tape measures to check. After my attempts to get this discussed in Parliament failed, we recommend that you just ignore that final sentence. So, we've covered the basics of movement in Warhammer 40,000 2nd edition. I've had to skip some key rules like Overwatch, positioning, moving charging models, and hiding, but don't worry, we'll get around to them someday. We've also exposed multiple issues with the rules as written, and even found one sentence in the rulebook that we suggest you flat out ignore. So the question you are now asking yourself is, should you try and actually play a game of this? The answer is yes, of course you should. What else would you do? Golf? Beetle fighting? Eating healthy and exercising? No. You want to play 2nd edition 40k. How else will you experience vortex grenades, your chaos lord turning into a chaos spawn, tyrannid creatures manifesting in vehicles, exploding squad members, hallucinogenic smoke, and a good old-fashioned virus outbreak? You won't. Except here.